Welcome. So, in the last episode, we left off talking about how Rochester, New York exports are their people, especially when it comes to jails, and how that population that goes into the jails actually props up the economies of those rural towns here in New York. Now, before we get into this episode, because this is going to be a heavy one, heavy. I do want to give a clarification when I talk about my girl Jenny. You know, the Jenny coefficient. The clarification is this, is that it looks at the distribution of income. And the reason why I word it as such of measures the income inequality based off of race is because of the disparities, the racial disparities that exist here in Rochester. You can visibly see them, but you can also measure them as well. So, got that out the way. Now, let's get into this episode. Today, we're going to look at a map, but we're not looking for directions. We're looking for the money. If you take the 1935 redlining map of Rochester, the one where the federal government literally drew red lines around the neighborhoods to say, quote unquote, do not invest there, and you overlay it with 2024 map of incarceration rates, something chilling happens. The lines match perfectly. This is what I call the Crescent to Cage pipeline. Now, for people who are unaware of the Crescent, we talked about that in the last episode. The Crescent is the area of Rochester, so it's a combination of zip codes where you could find the highest incidence and highest prevalence of anything bad that you can think of. High poverty, STDs, low education, trying to think poor health outcomes, so on and so forth. The 14605, the 14621, the 14608, these aren't just quote unquote poor neighborhoods. In the eyes of the state, these are resource extraction zones. Let's define a new term for the audit. The resident as revenue. In a healthy city, a resident is a taxpayer, a consumer, a neighbor. But in the Crescent, if the invisible resume isn't allowed to work, that resident becomes a liability on the city's books. So now we're getting into something a little bit deeper. If the person is not able to find a job because those jobs are being gatekept, especially from people who look just like me, what do you think people are going to end up doing to pay their bills, to have money in their pocket? It's by design. And it pains me because there's so many people who are on the forefront of this movement. They're big on social media. Some of them work in the legal field, but no one talks about this. No one talks about this. They talk about, or they rather portray themselves as a freedom fighter, I guess, a disruptor of the field, but they're not moving the needle towards progression because a lot of it is performative. Let me say it one more time. They're not moving the needle towards progression because a lot of it is performative. And if you know, like I know, and if you don't know, I guess you'll never ever get to know, anyone in their right mind who has experience, both formal and informal, so credentialed and life experience, they can easily tell that this is performative. That's just my 2 cents. But let's move on. However, the moment that resident is arrested and sent 2 hours away to an upstate prison, they transform. Suddenly they are worth $115,000 a year in state funding. They become the economic engine for a rural town that would otherwise be a ghost town. Are you taking this in? Are you taking this in? So when you get arrested and you go to an upstate prison, you're more than just a number. You're a cog in the wheel. You're a cog in the economic engine. And no one told you that. Of course they're not going to tell you that. Of course they're not going to tell you that. You just think you doing a big, you doing a bid. You think you doing a big one, for the people back at home on the block and stuff like that. And it's a greater thing at play. So in a way, you played yourself. You played yourself. But you would ask, you say, Quentin, how did I play myself when no one told me? Well, that's when you read a book or two. Get somewhere, get quiet, and read a book or two. But that's just me. Let's go on. The Core Craft Audit. The 16-cent factory. Let's go inside the cage. The cage is the jail. Let's talk about Corecraft. Most people in New York have never heard that name, but you've sat on their chairs. You've used their desk. Corecraft is the quote-unquote brand name for a division of correctional industries. It is a multi-million-dollar business that uses incarcerated labor. I want to tell you about a man I'll call Marcus. Marcus grew up in 14621. He had the hands of a craftsman, but Edison Tech had already been gutted. Well, we'll get into that in episode 5. So that'll be the next episode. He ended up in Attica. For 5 years, worked 40 hours a week making high-end office furniture for New York State agencies. Let's look at Marcus's pay stub. Marcus earned 16 cents an hour. In a 40-hour week, Marcus made $6.40. But wait, the audit isn't done. New York takes deductions for room and board. Then Marcus had to pay for a 15-minute phone call to his daughter in Rochester, which cost more than his entire day's wages. By the end of the week, Marcus had $1.28 in his pocket. Meanwhile, the state said the desk he made, sold the desk he made for $450. That is a 99% profit margin built on the backs of the Crescent. Found that a little difficult to read. Not because I can't read, but because of how this is designed. How this is designed. You don't have access to jobs on the outside. You get picked up for whatever reason, and you're cheap. You're looked at as cheap labor. You're looked at as a liability, and they have to turn a profit off of you. And that's what it has to show. I think that when I was putting this together, because I try to be transparent as much as I can be. When I was putting this whole thing together, doing the research, so on and so forth, it was heart-wrenching because for a lot of people who look like me, they don't have a way out. They don't. They don't have a way out. And trying to pick my words very carefully. The way that some Black people who this is not their daily reality, how they have a skewed sense of how things are, is disheartening. It is disheartening. It is, it takes me to a place where I wonder if there were people who did not carry this pompous attitude regarding lower performing people when they've just been more susceptible to the design and the whole system. Look, as you can see, I'm having a hard time even sitting here talking about it because what you have to ask yourself, what goes on internally to be able to say, to be able to look at a person who looks just like you and to say, oh, they're lazy or they're just so consumed with the street life. So, it is what it is when they're just trying to survive. And oh, I love this one. Oh, they should just know right from wrong. They should know right from wrong, but you're not in the same position they're in because you had a leg up somewhere, but it's not that much of a leg up compared to them. There's a lot of people who look like me, and it's making my head hurt right now as I talk about it because there's a lot of black people, not all, because I don't like to generalize, but you get a little bit of privilege and you think that you are the exception to the rule. Has it ever dawned on you that the reason why some of you are able to achieve what you've achieved is because of few reasons? Either due to your adjacency to whiteness or your ability to not be perceived as a threat or a combination of what I just stated. I'm a prime example of if you are perceived to be a threat, you will be sat down. I was sat down through my career, but I can firmly attest to you that if I would have stayed here in Rochester, New York, and I hadn't moved, I probably would have been sat down in other ways. Before we move on, I'm going to be transparent with you. There was one time I had moved back from Chicago, was in a relationship, didn't work out. Live life, it is what it is, water under the bridge, right? So when I came back to Rochester, I said, Quentin, and Quentin said, what? I said, you have to make this count because you're not going to be here too long. You're not going to be here in Rochester for too long. So get yourself together and we going to be on the next thing smoking. Up out of here. So one of the jobs that I did was I worked at Planet Fitness. I had snagged a job at Express. I had snagged a job at Lennon's. Well, was it Lennon? No, Bed Bath and Beyond. When I say I was working like I just needed, I had several jobs. What, who you telling? And it was one day I got off of work at Planet Fitness because I would do the evening shift, the one in Arundicoid. I get in my car. At that time, I had a 2005 Acura TO. That was the best car I had. Loved it. 10 on it. The color was like a goldish beige, but some people would joke around and say, oh, that's old man tan right there. I loved it. It was what it was. So I'm driving from Arundicoid all the way to the 19th Ward. I'll never ever forget it. I'm going down Genesee Street as if I'm going to maybe Mount Hope, that direction, but not as far. So I get to the intersection of Genesee and Arnett. I seen a cop. I was making a right-hand turn. I seen a cop making a left-hand turn, so they had to wait for me to make my turn first before they can move forward. And I'm driving, not really paying attention. It was what it was. When I put my signal on to turn into the driveway of my destination, that's when the lights come on. I said, okay. So I pull over. 2 cops get out. 1 woman, 1 man. It was a black woman, and then the guy, I want to say he was a black Hispanic. He comes up to the car. The woman goes, and she's on my passenger side. And this is what he says. He says, do you know why I pulled you over? I think that is the silliest question. So I said, no, I don't know why you pulled me over. He goes, your light above your license plate is out. Now, I knew this was a lie. You want to know why I knew it was a lie? because I babied the mess out of that car. That was my baby. That was the car that I always wanted for such a long time. So we go along with this. So I said, okay. I said, can I get out the car and look at it? He says, no. I said, okay. He goes, can I get your license and registration? I said, yes. So he's holding my license and registration and he says, if I go back and run your information, is there anything that I'm going to find? Now, I done got pulled over before. Not too many times, okay? But I done got pulled over before for speeding. That was it. That was when I was younger. Nobody in their right mind has ever asked me anything silly like that. So that's when I knew he was trying to bait me because he was already sizing me up and making this assumption, not an inference, because they're two totally different things. An inference is based off of fact. An assumption is not. So you're assuming that I'm a drug dealer or something like that based off of the car that I'm driving and the zip code that I'm in. Check that. So I go, no, you're not going to find anything. He goes back to the car. He's there for a long time. You would think this man was searching for something. Everything came back clean because I don't have a record. So then the woman, she's still on the other side. She's trying to talk to me, make small talk, all this other carrying on. With the little flashlight, trying to look in the car to see if she sees any drugs or whatever the case may be, which I don't do drugs. So I'm sitting there looking and just like, what are you harassing me for? Then I heard on the radio, they radioed over to a cop that was over, was it Warwick? Over there on Warwick. He comes around, short white guy. You can already tell he had a complex, a short man complex. So he comes up to the side of the passenger side of the car. He goes, is there anything that we need to know? So what are you talking about? Well, where have you been? I said, I work at Planet Fitness. I'm just now getting off. Never said anything about the tent. So I know New York State is criminalizing tent, but that's been a big thing for a long time. And we're going to slightly pivot a little bit and then come on back. When I first got that car, I had went to get my car service at a place, I think it was called CDI. CDI. It was way, way out like near Eastview Mall. And I was just getting an oil change. I was sitting in the waiting room and I'll never forget this type of stuff. This type of stuff you don't forget. You don't forget it because of how it made you feel. So I'm sitting in the waiting room, waiting for them to get done, and there's two white guys, and they're having a conversation. One goes, yeah, bro. There was this Audi that really caught my attention. But it was like in the city, and it had already been like ghettofied. It had the tent on it. So from there, it gave me a fair sense of this is how they view tent. But I had seen white people with tent. It's okay for them to have it, but when it comes to black people, they automatically think you're doing something illegal. So to get back to that traffic stop, I asked the white cop why he all, puffed up and stuff like that. I said, can I get out the car to look to see about the light over the license plate? He said, no, but I got out the car anyways. Because I'm like, you playing in my face. Mind you, by this time, he has not brought back my license nor my registration. So by this time, my family and people in the neighborhood are coming out and they're like, what did he do? What did he do? You want to know what the white cop said? He said, as if he didn't direct it towards me, which showed me that he did not respect me as a man. He was looking at me as a kid because God forbid I be driving an Acura. And if I am driving an Acura in that zip code, it's got to be drug related. So he made that assumption. He told the people outside, including my family, he said, well, he asking all them questions. He keep asking them questions. Next time it ain't going to fare so well for him. You heard what I said? I still remember that. I still remember that. Still remember that. That's when the point was driven home for me that if I continued to stay here, it wouldn't end good for me. I have a master's, so I beat the odds. That was that was right before I got my executive residency. So I was in my late 20s. So the course of action that I took, that I had a friend at the time, he was working under Mayor Lovely Warren. Like he was doing some stuff for her or whatever the case, some design stuff. I know how some of y'all feel about her, whatever the case may be. But the one thing that I will say is that I got a call from the head of police and we talked about it. And it was just it was a thing of them profiling me. It was an issue of them profiling me. I spoke to the guy, I told him where I got my education from, what my experience was, things of that nature. All he could say was that he was sorry and that those police needed to be retrained. I said, retrained on what? This man had the nerve to say customer service training. When he said that, I knew it was a done deal and my focus was getting the hell out of Dodge. Nothing related to race relations, nothing related to the things that go on in Rochester. Why would they even care? Because this is all based off of design. So why would they care? Why would they care? And it's not negatively affecting them. He was white. The short cop that had an issue, who told me that it wouldn't end so well for me, told other people that, not me directly, he was white. He didn't have anything to lose. And in that moment, I had to be okay with being treated as a boy instead of a man. In that moment before he said what he said, he didn't feel as though I was owed an explanation for anything. In that moment, he didn't think that I was capable enough to achieve the things that I have achieved, such as getting an Acura. Do you not realize how dehumanizing that is, or that was? But I digress. Let's continue. The rural subsidy. Why does this matter to you? Because of the rural subsidy, when we lose a black man or woman to the system, Rochester loses a father, a worker, a soul. But a rural town 2 hours away gains a job. The census counts those incarcerated men as quote unquote residents of the rural town, not Rochester. This is prison gerrymandering. Those quote unquote residents who can't vote are used to pad the population of rural districts, giving them more political power and more state funding for their roads and their schools. Your poverty in the 14605 is literally paving the roads in towns where you wouldn't become, where you are dark. They have turned our trauma into their middle class stability. They have turned the quote unquote invisible resume into a quote unquote visible inmate. This isn't justice. It's a commodity market. We have another sovereignty blueprint. How do we break the cage? We have to stop being the quote unquote raw material for their industry. And that starts with disruptive economics. We need to talk about legal and financial defense funds that are owed by the community, not the nonprofits. If the state's business model depends on a steady workflow of bodies from the 14621, then our business model must be to dam the river, quote unquote. Sovereignty means creating a local economy so tight that the core crafts of the world go bankrupt because they can't find any labor. It means reinvesting that 40 million from the quote unquote purse, and we will address that purse in upcoming episodes, into local bail funds and vocational training that happens before the handcuffs come out. If they want to build desks, let them pay a living wage to the craftsmen in the Crescent. If they won't pay, they don't get the labor. We have to make it more expensive to cage us than it is, than it is to respect us. I got a little tongue-tied there, excuse me. You know, I will be transparent. This episode, this is a little difficult to do. When you study and you look at the construction of said society, and it's through the scope of Rochester, I just look at it and I'm like, how are people supposed to win? How are people supposed to win? And by golly gee, wow, why are people not talking about this? Within this context, it seems like a lot of people who on the surface are trying to be liberators for this whole thing, they're doing this song and dance. It's rather performative. And they're doing this song and dance. And just to put it in context, because I don't want to hear anybody say, oh, well, you know, it takes time. You're just so impatient. I'm 36 years old. I started to see this stuff, like really see it in my late 20s. In my late 20s. Y'all had all this time. It feels like Rochester was, upon me coming back, it just feels like Rochester is in a, maybe, and it could just be me, it seems as though it's in a worse place than before I left. Like, things have gotten worse. The infrastructure is breaking down, but it's breaking down for poor people, but that's always been the case, but it's getting even worse. But I digress. Again, my name is Quentin. In the next episode, we're going to go back to school. We're going to perform a forensic audit on the sabotage of Edison Tech in their trades program. We're going to see exactly who stole the tools from under our hands. The lines on the map were drawn by them, but the path out is ours. Peace.